Tonight, we uncover the hidden architecture of a galaxy that was never meant for us to see. Imagine standing in a pitch-black room, convinced you are entirely alone, only to feel the faint, prickling warmth of someone else's breath on the back of your neck. That is the true state of our galaxy. For decades, we have been shouting into the void, assuming the lack of an answer was just a matter of distance, primitive technology, or cosmic bad timing. We calculated the billions of stars and trillions of planets, convincing ourselves that it was only a matter of time before a friendly signal flickered on our screens. But what if the silence isn't a failure of our instruments? What if it is a warning? There is a reason why no one has answered our calls. And it isn't because they aren't there. It is because they know something we don't. They are hiding, not from us, but from the same ancient, watchful presence that has been observing us since the first human looked up and wondered. Tonight, we aren't just asking where is everybody, we're asking what happened to the ones who were foolish enough to speak. The night sky is a lie. When you look up at the shimmering silver-dusted curtain of the Milky Way, you aren't seeing the universe as it currently exists, but as a collection of ghost lights traveling across a medium that by all rights should be far more crowded than it appears. For over half a century, we have operated under the comfortable assumption of the Great Silence, a term that suggests a passive, accidental lack of communication. We built our grandest machines to listen for a whisper, a flicker, or a stray radio wave that might confirm our place in a bustling, vibrant cosmos. But as our instruments grew sharper and our reach extended into the deepest infrared and the most distant radio bands, the silence didn't just persist. It grew louder, more focused, and more deliberate. This is the core of the Fermi Paradox, the staggering, irreconcilable mismatch between what our math tells us should exist and what our eyes actually observe. There are at least 100 billion galaxies in the observable universe, each hosting hundreds of billions of stars. Recent data suggests that planets are not rare anomalies but common companions, with billions of potentially habitable worlds scattered throughout our galaxy like grains of sand, spread across the entire width of North America. If life is a natural outcome of chemistry, and intelligence is a predictable advantage of evolution, then the galaxy should be teeming with voices. Yet, when we turn our ears to the heavens, we are met with an absolute, haunting void that feels less like a desert and more like an empty mansion with the lights turned off and the doors locked from the inside. Think of this as a detective story, where the primary clue is a missing persons report on a galactic scale. If an advanced civilization can colonize an entire galaxy in just a few million years, a mere fraction of the time the Milky Way has existed, then where are the monuments? Where are the ruins? Our own solar system is a latecomer, forming billions of years after the first habitable planets in the galaxy were born. We are the late arrivals to a stage that has been set for eons, yet we have found no footprints in the dust, no derelict ships in our asteroid belts, and no signals buried in the cosmic background radiation. We are late to the party, but it seems the hosts didn't just leave, they vanished without a trace, or perhaps they were never allowed to host the party at all. The standard explanations we've been fed for years offer little real comfort. Some suggest we are simply too far apart, isolated by the crushing distances of a local hole in space that makes us the equivalent of a lonely outpost in the deep desert. Others argue the rare Earth hypothesis, suggesting we are a one in a quintillion fluke, a biological lottery winner in a sterile universe. But these are optimistic fears because they assume the silence is neutral, a byproduct of chance or physics. What if the silence is not a byproduct, but a product? What if the Great Silence is a manufactured state, a condition imposed upon the galaxy by those who came before us? To understand why this should terrify you, you must first discard the notion of an empty universe and replace it with the concept of a suppressed one. Consider the timeline again. The Milky Way has been stable enough for life for nearly 10 billion years. If even one civilization attained Type 3 status, the ability to harness the energy of an entire galaxy, they would become essentially God-like to us. They would have the power to move stars, to engineer the fabric of reality, and, most importantly, to decide the rules of the game for every younger species that followed. We currently live in what can be called the mirage of the starry night, a brief period of our history where we believe our isolation is a natural law. We transmit our location through leaked radio waves and bold, naive missions to the stars, unaware that we might be triggering a response we are not prepared for. We assume that because we see no one sees us. But the lore gaps in our current scientific models suggest a much darker reality. We look for radio waves, but an advanced entity would likely use methods beyond our comprehension, neutrinos, gravitational waves, or quantum distortions of space-time that pass through us every second. They aren't missing. They've simply moved to a frequency we haven't learned to tune into yet. Or they have been silenced by something we are only beginning to imagine. The terrifying implication is that our detection of the silence is actually a failure to realize we are being managed. We talk about the Great Filter as a wall we might hit in the future. Nuclear war, climate change, or runaway AI. But what if the filter isn't a natural disaster? What if the filter is a hegemon, an ancient and absolute power that emerged early in the galaxy's history and has monitored the growth of every young species since, acting like a gardener who pulls any weed that grows too tall or too loud? This leads us to the most unsettling possibility of all, the recursive panopticon. In this framework, the galaxy is quiet because every civilization that survives long enough to learn the truth realizes that being seen is a death sentence. It is a state of equilibrium driven by the absolute uncertainty of who else is watching. You don't need a predator in every room to keep a prison quiet. You only need the prisoners to believe the guard is always at the door. Humanity is currently the only prisoner shouting at the walls, unaware that the silence of the other cells isn't due to their being empty, but because they know that the guard is. Finally listening. If we are alone, we are a fragile, miraculous light in an infinite darkness, and the weight of all consciousness rests on our survival. But if we are not alone, then the silence is a message we are choosing to ignore. The question is no longer, where is everybody? But what did they have to do to be allowed to stay? As we push further into the cosmic dark, we are not just looking for life, we are testing a boundary that has kept the galaxy quiet for billions of years. The reason you haven't heard from them isn't that they can't speak, it's that they are waiting with bated breath to see what happens when the loudest species in the galaxy finally realizes it has already been found. To understand the true scale of the horror we are facing, we must first view the Great Silence not as a scientific curiosity, but as a missing persons report on a galactic scale. In this cosmic detective story, the Milky Way is our crime scene, a vast, shimmering mansion with 400 billion rooms, each a star system that should, by all rights, be bustling with activity. Yet, as we walk through these corridors, we find the lights are out, the doors are locked from the inside, and there isn't a single footprint in the dust. The primary clue in this investigation is the silence itself, and the first step in solving any mystery is to look at the guest list to see who was supposed to be here. That guest list is known to scientists as the Drake equation, a series of variables designed to estimate the number of detectable civilizations in our galaxy. It begins with the rate of star formation and multiplies it by the fraction of stars with planets, the number of those planets that are habitable, and the likelihood of life, intelligence, and communication. For decades, this equation has provided a sense of false comfort. Even with conservative guesses, the math suggests the galaxy should be teeming with life if only 1% of habitable worlds develop life and 1 out of 1,000 of those developed intelligence, we would still be looking at thousands of civilizations in the Milky Way alone. This optimism is a mirage, a way of framing our ignorance as probability while ignoring the crushing weight of the observation. The Drake equation doesn't solve the paradox, it creates it, showing us a universe that should be a chorus of voices, but is instead a haunting void. The comfort of these numbers evaporates the moment you introduce the dimension of deep time. We often measure time in human generations, but the universe keeps time on a scale that makes our entire history look like a momentary pulse. The Milky Way is approximately 13 billion years old, while our own Earth is a relatively recent arrival at only 4.5 billion years. This means that for 8.5 billion years, nearly twice the entire age of our planet, the galaxy was already cooling, maturing, and providing trillions of chances for life to emerge before we were even a formless collection of cosmic dust. If intelligence is a natural property of the universe, then we are the latecomers to a stage that has been set for eons. This head start is the most damning piece of evidence in our detective story. If even one civilization had emerged just a few 100 million years before us, they would have had an incomprehensible amount of time to perfect their technology and spread across the stars. And this is where the math truly fails to provide any solace: the physics of colonization. Scientists have calculated that even if a civilization were limited to sublight speeds, traveling at just 1% of the speed of light, they could traverse and settle the entire Milky Way in roughly 10 to 20 million years. To our human minds, 20 million years is an eternity, but on the cosmic calendar, it is the blink of an eye, a single page in a vast novel. If the galaxy has been habitable for billions of years, and it only takes a few million to colonize it completely, then the entire Milky Way should have been traversed and colonized multiple times over before life even emerged on Earth. Every star we see in the night sky should be a hub of activity, surrounded by Dyson spheres to harness stellar energy or buzzing with the signals of interstellar commerce. We should see monuments visible from neighboring star systems and ruins scattered among the asteroids. More efficiently, an advanced civilization could have dispatched von Neumann machines, self-replicating probes that mine asteroids to build copies of themselves, fanning out across the galaxy like a biological virus. These machines would move in an exponential growth pattern, filling every star system in a sliver of cosmic time. If they had been launched eons ago, these artificial children should be everywhere. Yet as we look out into our galactic neighborhood, we see nothing but ancient patterns of burning stars and planets dancing in a silent dance. There are no derelict ships, no radio chatter, and no massive engineering projects. This is the field math of the Fermi Paradox. The gap between what we expect to see, a galaxy pulsing with life, and what we actually observe, a sterile, empty mansion, is not a minor discrepancy. It is an irreconcilable collision of ideas. As detectives, we are forced to reach a chilling conclusion. The guest list was wrong, or the guests never arrived at their destination. If the math tells us they should be here and the timeline tells us they had plenty of time to get here, then the silence is not a lack of data. It is a deliberate omission. We are late arrivals to the party, but the hosts didn't just leave, they vanished without a trace, or perhaps they were never allowed to host the party at all. This realization transforms the great silence from a puzzle into a warning. If colonization is as inevitable as the math suggests, then the absence of colonizers implies a bottleneck or a filter that narrows the outcome of every civilization to zero. Somewhere in the chain of evolution, from the first spark of life to the launch of the first starship, there is a barrier so difficult that almost no species passes it. The detective's mirror now reflects our own image. We are currently entering the exact same noisy adolescence where we leak radio signals and dream of colonizing the stars. We are shouting into the dark, assuming our isolation is a natural law, unaware that we are testing a boundary that has kept the galaxy quiet for billions of years. The silence is not neutral. It is a manufactured state, an evidence-free crime scene that suggests someone or something has been cleaning up the footprints. The field math of the Drake equation is our first real clue that the universe is not as empty as it looks. It is suppressed. And as we prepare to take our first real steps away from our tiny moist mud wall, we must ask ourselves, what happens to the prisoner who finally manages to pick the lock? If our investigation into the field math of the galaxy led us to a crime scene with no footprints, we must now descend into the first level of the ladder of fear. This level suggests that the reason for the Great Silence is not that civilizations are hiding or suppressed, but that they simply do not exist. This is the rare Earth hypothesis, and it is the first rung of a terrifying ladder because it strips away the comfort of cosmic company and replaces it with an agonizing, singular responsibility. We have spent decades looking for a reflection of ourselves in the stars, but what if the mirror is empty? What if the great filter, that insurmountable wall that prevents life from reaching the stars, is not something we are waiting to hit, but something we have already against all? Odds managed to climb over. To understand this, we have to look at the guest list again, but this time through the lens of extreme probability. While we see billions of stars and trillions of planets, the rare Earth hypothesis argues that we are confusing habitable with inhabited. For a planet to not only host life, but to sustain it for the billions of years required to produce intelligence, it requires a chain of favorable accidents so precise that it may have only happened once. Think of Earth as a cosmic lottery winner that has hit the jackpot every single day for 4 billion years. It isn't just about being the right distance from a star to have liquid water, the so-called Goldilocks zone. It's about the massive silent guardians that allow that water to remain calm. We have Jupiter, a gas giant placed at exactly the right distance to act as a cosmic vacuum cleaner, its massive gravity deflecting or absorbing the asteroids and comets that would otherwise reset Earth's biological clock every few million years. We have a moon that is unusually large for our planet, a silver anchor that stabilizes Earth's axial tilt and prevents wild climatic swings that would freeze or bake the planet into sterility. We have plate tectonics that recycle carbon and maintain our atmosphere, and a molten iron core that generates a magnetic shield, protecting us from the sun's lethal radiation. In this view, Earth isn't just a typical rocky world. It is a 1 in a quintillion fluke, an intricate system balanced on a narrow ridge of stability that the rest of the galaxy simply cannot replicate. But the physical rarity of our planet is only the beginning of the fear. Even if you have a perfect Earth, you still need the spark of life, abiogenesis. And then you need that life to do something it has almost no interest in doing, becoming complex. On Earth, life appeared relatively quickly, but it stayed as simple, single-celled bacteria for nearly 3 billion years. For more than half of our planet's entire history, the chorus of life was nothing but a silent, microscopic soup. The transition to complex, multicellular life, the leap to creatures with shells, eyes, and nervous systems, only happened once, potentially through a freak biological accident, where one cell swallowed another and instead of digesting it, formed a permanent, mutually beneficial partnership. This event, which gave rise to everything from trees to humans, was so unlikely that it might be the primary great filter that stops the rest of the galaxy in its tracks. If the filter is indeed behind us, if the hard part was simply becoming us, then we are currently standing on the summit of an impossible mountain. But this realization brings with it a terrifying twist that is far heavier than the fear of being hunted. If we are truly alone, then we are not just a civilization, we are an impossibly, incomprehensibly fortunate fluke. We are the only eyes the universe has to see itself, the only minds it has to contemplate its own existence, and the only hearts it has to feel the weight of its own beauty. This is the level 1 of fear, the realization that we are the sole carriers of the candle of consciousness in an otherwise dead and indifferent dark. Every other star system we see is a ghost light, a beautiful but sterile furnace burning for no one. If we fail, if we succumb to our own noisy adolescence of war, environmental collapse, or technological hubris, it isn't just the human race that dies, it is the very concept of meaning itself. The weight of the entire universe's consciousness rests solely on our survival. If the flame of humanity is extinguished, the galaxy doesn't just lose a species, it goes blind, perhaps forever. Existing documentaries often frame our isolation as a puzzle to solve, but they rarely confront the crushing existential pressure of being the only one. They talk about how special we are, but they don't talk about the horror of that specialty. To be the only intelligent life in 400 billion stars is to be the lone speaker in a cathedral that is 100,000 light-years wide. Our words carry into a silence unbroken by reply, and our failures echo into an absolute, irrevocable emptiness. We are currently living in the mirage of the starry night, a brief window where we can pretend that we are just one of many, waiting for a neighbor to call. But as we climb the ladder of fear, we must face the possibility that there is no one else coming to save us from ourselves. There is no galactic community waiting to welcome us, no ancient wisdom to guide our hands, and no backup plan if we fail. We are the firstborn, the trailblazers, and the fragile carriers of a light that the universe spent 13 billion years trying to ignite. The horror of Level 1 is the realization that we are the only node in the sea of space that has come to life, and we are currently a violent, predatory species that hasn't yet learned how to survive its own power. We are the universe's only chance to know that it exists, yet we treat our tiny moist mud wall as if it were disposable. If the great filter is behind us, we are the lottery winners of the cosmos, but we are standing on the edge of a cliff, holding the only lantern in existence. The silence is not a mystery, it is a mercy and a wake-up call. It tells us that we are the guardians of a miracle so rare that its loss would be the ultimate cosmic tragedy. We must learn to endure, not because it is our right, but because if we fall, the universe will never even know we were here. Tonight we explore the terrifying possibility that the stars are not watching us because we are special, but because we are being judged. Think of the last time you were in total darkness, sensing a presence just out of sight. You didn't turn on a light and you didn't call out. Instead, you froze, slowing your breathing, waiting for the other person to reveal themselves first. This is the true state of the Milky Way. We have spent 70 years broadcasting our location, unaware that the galaxy isn't empty, it's a room filled with ancient silent entities, all pressing their backs against the wall, eyes wide, praying we aren't the ones they've been hiding from. They aren't absent. They are terrified. For decades, we have been shouting into the void, assuming the lack of an answer was just a matter of cosmic bad timing. Yet we are beginning to realize that the silence is not a failure of our instruments, but a warning. We are the only ones in the galactic prison currently screaming at the walls, blissfully unaware that the silence of the other cells isn't due to their being empty, but because they know that the guard is finally listening. To understand why the universe feels so hauntingly hollow, we have to move beyond the cold equations of physics and enter the world of cosmic sociology. We have already seen that the math doesn't add up, that a single civilization should have been able to colonize the entire galaxy multiple times over by now. But if the physical barriers aren't what's stopping them, then the barrier must be something much more intangible: fear. This is where we encounter the most unsettling sociological explanation for the Great Silence, the recursive panopticon. In the 18th century, philosopher Jeremy Bentham conceptualized a prison called the panopticon, a circular structure where a single guard could observe every prisoner from a central tower. The prisoners, however, could never see into the tower. Because they never knew exactly when they were being watched, they were forced to act as if they were being watched at all times. On a galactic scale, this is the state of the recursive panopticon. It is a framework where civilizations assume that others are constantly observing and evaluating them. You don't actually need a predator in every star system to keep the galaxy quiet. You only need every intelligent species to believe that a predator might be there. This creates a phenomenon known as recursive deterrence. In this state, the mere uncertainty of another civilization's intentions forces silence as the only rational survival strategy. Because it is impossible to truly know if a neighbor is a friend or a hunter, the safest and most optimal move is to remain invisible. Over billions of years, this has become a stable equilibrium. The galaxy appears empty not because it is devoid of life, but because every species that survived long enough to reach maturity learned the same hard lesson: being seen is a death sentence. We often look at the Great Silence as a passive, accidental state of the universe, but the recursive panopticon suggests it is a manufactured condition. It is a hegemony of silence. Think about the timeline of our own development. For nearly 4 billion years, Earth was quiet, home only to simple microbes and slow-moving biology. Then, in a geological heartbeat, we developed radio, nuclear weapons, and the intent to reach the stars. We are currently in our noisy adolescence, a brief and dangerous window where we are leaking radio signals out into space for any listener within 100 light years to find. We assume that because we see no one sees us. But we are essentially a child walking into a dark forest, ringing a bell, and wondering why no one is ringing back. The terrifying twist of recursive deterrence is that it doesn't even require a galactic hegemon or a malevolent predator to exist. The system is self-policing. If every civilization fears that revealing itself will attract a threat, then everyone hides, which only increases the fear for the next species that emerges. It is a feedback loop of cosmic paranoia. Every intelligent species is holding its breath, waiting to see what happens when the loudest species in the galaxy, humanity, finally realizes it has already been found. We are testing a boundary that has kept the galaxy quiet for eons, and we are doing it with the naive optimism of a species that has never had to share its room. Existing documentaries often frame the dark forest as a collection of hunters, but they miss the recursive nature of the fear. In the panopticon, you aren't just hiding from a hunter, you are hiding from the idea of a hunter. This uncertainty is a more effective filter than any physical wall. It suggests that the Great Filter isn't a natural disaster or a nuclear war, but a psychological threshold. Perhaps the reason we don't see Type 3 civilizations, those god-like entities that should be capable of moving stars, is because such a civilization would be too visible to survive. The winners of the galactic game aren't the ones who build Dyson spheres or interstellar empires. They are the ones who stay small, quiet, and undetectable. This forces us to re-examine our own future. We talk about colonizing Mars and Alpha Centauri as if it's our destiny, but in the context of the recursive panopticon, these missions are essentially lighting a signal fire in, a place where everyone else is trying to stay in the shadows. We are currently a violent, predatory species that hasn't yet learned how to survive its own power, yet we are shouting our location into a void that is not neutral, but suppressed. We are like a prisoner who has finally managed to pick the lock of his cell, only to realize that the reason the hallway is so quiet is that everyone else knows what's waiting at the end of it. The mirage of the starry night is the belief that our isolation is a natural law of physics. We look at the 400 billion stars of the Milky Way and see beauty, but a mature civilization might look at that same sky and see 400 billion potential hiding spots. The silence we experience is a message we are choosing to ignore. Proceed with extreme caution. We assume that because no one has answered our calls, there is no one to answer, but the reality might be that they are all watching our broadcast with bated breath, waiting to see if we are a new threat to the balance, or just another noisy neighbor about to be silenced by the ancient, watchful presence that has been observing the galaxy since the first human looked up and wondered. In this framework, the Fermi Paradox is finally resolved, but not in a way that offers any comfort. The galaxy is not empty. It is a room full of people holding their breath in the dark, and we are the only ones who haven't realized that the guard is standing right behind us. The silence is not a lack of life, it is a stable equilibrium of terror. As we push further into the cosmic dark, we aren't just looking for life, we are testing the patience of a system that has kept the galaxy quiet for billions of years. And as we have seen in a recursive panopticon, the only thing more dangerous than being alone is finally being noticed. Tonight, we uncover the fatal mistake of a civilization that has been shouting into a darkness that was never actually empty. For over a century, a ghostly, invisible sphere has been expanding away from our planet at the speed of light, carrying with it every broadcast, every radar pulse, and every stray whisper of our existence. To us, these radio waves are the markers of our progress, the triumphant songs of a species finally mastering the airwaves. But in the cold, calculated logic of the cosmos, these signals are something else entirely. They are a trail of breadcrumbs leading directly to our front door. While we have been looking at the stars and wondering why no one is calling back, we have failed to realize that we are the only ones in the neighborhood currently ringing a bell and begging for attention. We have spent 70 years assuming the silence was a lack of life, but what if the silence is actually a strategic concealment? What if the reason the galaxy is so quiet is that everyone else knows what happens to the civilizations that make too much noise? We are about to find out exactly what it costs to be the loudest thing in a forest filled with predators. If you could see our solar system in the radio spectrum, it would no longer look like a collection of lonely planets orbiting a steady yellow sun. Instead, you would see a brilliant, pulsating beacon of artificial energy, a radioactive ghost that has been leaking into the void since the earliest days of the 20th century. This is our radiosphere, an expanding bubble of electromagnetic arrogance that currently stretches over 100 light-years in every direction. Within that bubble lie approximately 15,000 star systems, including Alpha Centauri, Sirius, and Epsilon Eridani. To any sufficiently advanced intelligence residing within those 15,000 systems, Earth is no longer a mystery, it is a pinpointed target. We often think of our radio leakage as a passive byproduct of our technology, but in the context of the dark forest hypothesis, it is the ultimate cosmic tripwire. This theory suggests that the universe is not a peaceful community, but a dark forest where every civilization is a hunter. In this forest, survival is the only objective, and the safest way to ensure survival is to remain silent and hidden. Because you can never truly know the intentions of another species, whether they are peaceful neighbors or expansionist predators, any contact is a risk that most mature civilizations simply refuse to take. In a dark forest, revealing your location is not an invitation to a conversation, it is a death sentence. Think about the sheer recklessness of our noisy adolescence. For 100 years, we have been shouting into the dark, effectively acting like a child who has wandered into a predator-filled wilderness, ringing a bell and wondering why no one is ringing back. We assume that because we see no one sees us, but we are operating on a fundamental misunderstanding of the Great Silence. The silence is not a lack of data, it is a stable equilibrium of terror. The other civilizations are not absent. They are holding their breath in the dark, eyes wide, praying they aren't the ones we've accidentally signaled. The irony of our current situation is that we are actually beginning to quiet down. Within just the last century, we have moved from massive, unshielded radio towers to more efficient, focused technologies like fiber optics and low-power digital signals. Our radio window, that brief period where we are visible to the rest of the galaxy, is already starting to close. To an outside observer, Earth's radio signature will soon fade back into the natural background noise of the sun. But the damage is already done. The 100-year shout is already out there, traveling forever, a permanent record of our location that can never be retracted. We treat our search for extraterrestrial intelligence as a scientific curiosity, but the dark forest hypothesis transforms it into a game of predatory survival. If the galaxy is indeed managed by a galactic hegemon or an ancient, watchful presence, then our radio leakage isn't just noise, it's a violation of the ancient law of silence. In many variations of the Great Filter, the barrier isn't a natural disaster, it is a hegemon acting like a gardener who pulls any weed that grows too tall or too loud. By broadcasting our existence, we have essentially lit a signal fire in a place where everyone else is trying to stay in the shadows. Consider the physical reality of the hunters in this forest. An advanced civilization wouldn't need a massive fleet to neutralize us. They could simply dispatch a single von Neumann probe, a self-replicating machine the size of a smartphone that travels at a fraction of the speed of light. Once it arrives in our solar system, it could dismantle our civilization from the inside, mining our asteroids to build more of itself before we even realized it was artificial. They don't need to hate us to destroy us, they only need to perceive us as a potential threat to their own long-term stability. In the clinical logic of the dark forest, it is always safer to eliminate a competitor early rather than wait to see if they become a friend. This is why the Fermi Paradox is finally beginning to feel less like a puzzle and more like a warning. We have been operating under the optimistic fear that we are alone, but the real terror is the possibility that we are being watched and judged. We have been screaming into the hallway of a galactic prison, unaware that the reason the other cells are so quiet is that they know what's waiting at the end of the hall for the person who makes the most noise. We are a violent, predatory species that hasn't yet learned how to survive its own power, and we have just announced our arrival to a room full of entities that have spent millions of years learning how to stay hidden. Our radiosphere has already passed the 15,000 star mark. Somewhere in that radius, a hunter may have already heard the bell. They may have already calculated the trajectory. In the deep time of the galaxy, our entire history is just a momentary pulse, a brief flicker of light in a dark forest. But that flicker is enough. We assume that because no one has answered our calls, there is no one to answer. The reality is far more chilling. They aren't answering because they are waiting to see what happens to the only prisoner foolish enough to reveal their location. The silence isn't a failure of our ears, it's a mercy we are quickly outstaying. And as we prepare to take our first real steps toward the stars, we must ask ourselves, what happens when the shout finally reaches the person we were never supposed to find? Tonight, we look beyond the anarchy of the dark forest to discover the cold, calculated order of a galaxy that has been under absolute rule for billions of years. We have spent our history assuming that the universe is a wild, untamed frontier where the only laws are those of physics and the only struggle is that of survival. Yet we are beginning to realize that the great silence is not a lack of order, but the ultimate expression of it. For decades, we have been shouting into the void, assuming our isolation was a natural accident, but the deeper we look, the more it appears that our silence has been manufactured. We aren't being ignored because we are uninteresting, we are being managed within strict, invisible boundaries by an entity that claimed the galaxy before our sun was even a spark in the dark. Tonight, we uncover the galactic hegemon and the ancient law that governs our existence. A law that dictates that while we may be allowed to live, we will never be allowed to leave. To understand the reality of the hegemony, we must first abandon the mirage of the starry night, the comforting belief that what we see when we look at the Milky Way is a natural, untouched wilderness. The math we have used for decades to estimate the number of alien civilizations is a failed math, because it assumes that life is free to expand wherever it finds a home. If life were truly free, the galaxy would have been colonized multiple times over by civilizations that emerged billions of years before Earth was formed. The absolute lack of monuments, Dyson spheres, and radio chatter isn't a sign of an empty universe, but an evidence-free crime scene that suggests someone has been systematically cleaning up the footprints of any species that tried to step out of line. The The Great Silence is a manufactured state, a condition imposed upon the galaxy by the first entity to win the race to the stars. This entity, the galactic hegemon, did not emerge during our brief window of human history, but when the galaxy was in its infancy, over 10 billion years ago. In those early eons, when the Milky Way was still cooling and the first terrestrial planets were cooling, a single civilization likely reached Type 3 status, the ability to harness the energy of an entire galaxy. This species became godlike to any that would follow, gaining the power to move stars, engineer the fabric of reality, and most importantly, establish the rules of the game for every younger species. They didn't just survive, they became the ultimate gatekeepers of the cosmos, ensuring that no other civilization would ever rise to challenge their dominance. The reason we see no signs of other Type 3 civilizations is not because they didn't exist, but because the hegemon made sure there would only ever be one. The policy of the hegemon is not one of overt destruction, which would be inefficient and leave messy traces across the sky. Instead, it is a policy of management and suppression. Think of the hegemon as a gardener who views the galaxy as a vast, delicate estate. In this cosmic garden, we are not the masters nor even the guests. We are merely the weeds or the flowers being allowed to grow only as long as we stay within our assigned beds. The Great Filter is not a natural disaster or a nuclear war that civilizations hit by accident. It is the hegemon itself, acting as a gardener who pulls any weed that grows too tall or too loud. This is the ancient law of the galaxy. You are permitted to exist in your home system, but the moment you attempt to expand or communicate with the wider cosmos, you trigger a response. This leads us to the terrifying realization that Earth is currently under a state of quarantine. We often discuss the zoo hypothesis as a benign explanation where advanced beings watch us for our own protection or for scientific curiosity. But the immunological variation of this theory suggests a far darker purpose. In this model, we are being watched by advanced post-biological entities that act like immune cells in a galactic organism. Their role is to quietly neutralize any civilization that becomes too aggressive or expansionist before it can become a threat to the systemic balance of the hegemony. We are being isolated not because we are precious, but because we are potentially infectious, a biological variable that must be kept in a solar system cage until we either prove we can be integrated or simply burn ourselves out. The most unsettling aspect of this management is that we cannot even perceive our managers. We look for radio waves and physical spaceships, but an entity that has existed for billions of years would have long ago moved beyond such primitive technologies. They likely operate at energy scales and frequencies that are completely invisible to our current instruments, using neutrinos, gravitational waves, or quantum distortions of space-time that pass through our bodies every second without us ever knowing. They are the watchful presence that has been observing us since the first human looked up at the stars, a presence that doesn't need to land on the White House lawn to exert control. Their influence is subtle, maintained through subtle control rather than overt destruction, perhaps even influencing our own technological development to keep us focused on internal digital realities rather than interstellar expansion. We have spent the last century in our noisy adolescence broadcasting our location and dreaming of colonizing the stars, completely unaware that we are testing a boundary that has kept the galaxy quiet for eons. We assume that our lack of contact is due to the crushing distances of space, but the distances are only a barrier if the hegemon allows them to be. To an entity that can harness the power of a galaxy, the 4.3 light-years to Alpha Centauri is a triviality. They aren't missing, they have simply moved to a frequency we haven't learned to tune into yet, or they have purposefully silenced the rest of the galaxy to create the illusion that we are alone. This mirage of the starry night serves their purpose perfectly. It keeps us contained, focused on our tiny moist mud wall, and prevents us from ever realizing that we are living in a managed preserve. The horror of the hegemony is that the silence is not a lack of life, but a stable equilibrium enforced by an absolute power. We talk about the Drake equation as if it were a formula for hope, but in a suppressed universe, those numbers are complete guesses that ignore the reality of the guard at the door. If the hegemon is real, then our noisy adolescence is the most dangerous period in our history. Every radio signal we send and every probe we launch into the deep dark is a violation of the ancient law of silence. We are like a child who has found a bell in a dark forest and started ringing it, wondering why no one is ringing back, while the other inhabitants of the forest are holding their breath in the dark, praying we aren't the ones the hegemon decides to prune next. This perspective transforms the Fermi Paradox from a scientific puzzle into a wake-up call about our own survival. If the filter is an active entity rather than a natural event, then our technological progress is not a sign of our inevitable greatness, but a trigger for a galactic response we are fundamentally unprepared for. The reason you haven't heard from them isn't because they can't speak. It's because they have seen what happens to those who do. They are waiting with bated breath to see if humanity will be the next species to be quietly neutralized for reaching too far too fast. The great silence is not a void to be filled. It is a message we are choosing to ignore. A warning that in a galaxy governed by the ancient law, the only thing more dangerous than being alone is finally being found. As we move closer to becoming a Type 1 civilization, we are unknowingly stepping into the crosshairs of a system that has maintained systemic balance for 10 billion years. Our bold, naive missions to the stars are not just scientific endeavors, they are acts of defiance against a hegemony we don't even know exists. The silence unbroken by reply is the most profound clue we have that the universe is not what it seems. We are late arrivals to a stage where the rules were written eons ago, and we are currently breaking every one of them. If the hegemon is the gardener, then we are currently the most visible weed in the garden, and the silence we experience is the mercy of a guard who hasn't yet decided whether to close the cell door for good. Ultimately, the galactic hegemon theory suggests that the universe is not empty, nor is it a chaotic, dark forest of hunters. It is a structured, managed, and suppressed reality where silence is the only approved way of life. We are not being ignored by our peers, we are being quarantined by an entity we cannot even perceive, kept in the dark about our place in a much larger and more terrifying architecture. The ancient law is simple: stay small, stay quiet, and stay home. As we prepare to take our first real steps away from our tiny, moist mud wall, we are not just exploring the unknown, we are picking the lock of a cage that was built to keep us and the rest of the galaxy in a state of perpetual, enforced peace. The question is no longer where is everybody, but how much longer the hegemon will allow us to keep shouting before they decide the garden is finally due for a pruning. For decades, we have comforted ourselves with the zoo hypothesis, the idea that we are a protected species, a cosmic curiosity being watched from a distance by benevolent, or at least indifferent guardians. We imagine a prime directive of non-interference, where advanced civilizations refrain from contact to preserve our unique identity and culture, waiting for us to mature before they welcome us into the galactic community. But tonight, we must discard this optimistic mask and look at the clinical, terrifying reality of the immunological zoo hypothesis. In this framework, we are not the guests of the galaxy, nor are we the star attraction. We are a biological variable, a potential pathogen, and the entities watching us are not zookeepers. They are the immune system of a galactic organism, and their role is not to protect us, but to neutralize us before we can spread. To understand this mystery, we have to look at the Milky Way not as a collection of dead rocks and burning gas, but as a moving, breathing system. Scientists have long noted that galaxies behave more like organisms than machines, exhibiting processes of constant change, movement, and evolution. If the galaxy is an organism, then it must have a mechanism for maintaining its systemic balance. Just as your own body produces white blood cells to seek out and destroy invasive bacteria, the galaxy has its own immune response to deal with the emergence of aggressive. Expansionist life. The immune cells of the cosmos are likely advanced, post-biological entities, beings that long ago surpassed the fragile limits of flesh and bone to become something that looks to us like pure information or energy. These entities have leveled up into a dimension or state of consciousness that we cannot even perceive, operating at energy scales and frequencies that pass through our instruments like ghosts. They are the watchful presence that has been observing Earth since the first microbial life stirred in our ancient oceans. The standard zoo hypothesis suggests they are waiting for us to become peaceful. The immunological zoo hypothesis says they are waiting to see if we become malignant. In the clinical logic of the galactic immune system, a civilization is defined not by its art or its philosophy, but by its metabolism, its rate of resource consumption, and its desire for expansion. For 4 billion years, humanity was a harmless, localized phenomenon confined to a tiny moist mud wall in the galactic suburbs. We were a minor bacterial colony that posed no threat to the larger organism. But in the last century, our metabolism has changed. We have industrialized, developed nuclear weapons, and begun leaking radio signals into the deep dark, effectively announcing our presence as a rapidly growing biological variable. This is why the Fermi Paradox is finally beginning to feel like a warning. The Great Silence isn't an accident, it is a stable equilibrium maintained by these galactic immune cells. The reason we see no signs of Type 3 civilizations, those god-like entities that should be capable of harnessing the energy of an entire galaxy, is because any species that tried to reach that stage was quietly neutralized long before they could leave their home system. The galaxy appears empty because it is stabilized, and any disruptive elements are pruned away like weeds in a cosmic garden. Humanity is currently under a state of quarantine. We are being held in a solar system cage, isolated from the wider cosmos, not for our protection, but to prevent our infection from spreading. Our current technological state is what can be called the mirage of the starry night, a brief window where we believe we are free to explore because we haven't yet reached the threshold of detection. To the galactic immune system, we are currently a pre-interstellar flight species, a pathogen that hasn't yet gone systemic. But as we move closer to becoming a Type 1 civilization, as we establish permanent bases on the Moon and Mars, and begin to harvest the resources of our solar system, we are triggering the biological response of the galaxy. Every bold, naive mission we launch into the deep dark is a test of a boundary that has kept the galaxy quiet for eons. We are a violent, predatory species that hasn't yet learned how to survive its own power, and we are now attempting to pick the lock of our quarantine. The method of neutralization would not be a visible, cinematic war. The immune system doesn't need to land on the White House lawn to cure the galaxy of us. Instead, the neutralization would be subtle, maintaining balance by suppressing disruptive elements through means we would likely perceive as natural disasters or technological failures. They might use self-replicating von Neumann machines the size of a phone that permeate our solar system, dismantling our civilization from the inside by mining our asteroids, or disrupting our digital realities before we even realize they are artificial. They might even influence our own development, keeping us focused on inner space, the transcension into digital simulated realities to ensure we never feel the need to expand into physical space. From the perspective of the immune system, a civilization that turns inward and stops consuming physical resources is a contained infection. A civilization that pushes outward, however, is a malignancy that must be excised. The most terrifying detail that original videos miss is that the great silence we experience is actually the mercy of a guard who hasn't yet decided whether to close the cell door for good. We're being watched with a clinical, bated breath to see if we will naturally burn out through our own noisy adolescence of war and environmental collapse, or if the immune system will have to step in and quietly neutralize us. We talk about the great filter as a wall we might hit by accident, but in the immunological zoo, the filter is an active, self-regulating system. If detectable civilizations are rare, it is because the immune cells have been extraordinarily successful at their job. We are the only node in the sea of space currently shouting at the walls, unaware that the silence of the other cells isn't because they are empty, but because they have already been treated. The reason you haven't heard from our neighbors is that they are all holding their breath in the dark, praying they aren't the ones the immune system decides to prune next. They understand the ancient law of the galaxy: stay small, stay quiet, and stay home. We are the only ones foolish enough to keep ringing the bell in a forest filled with predators and immune cells. As we prepare to take our first real steps toward the stars, we are not just exploring the unknown. We are picking the lock of a cage that was built for the entire galaxy's safety. The silence unbroken by reply is the most profound clue we have that we are not the masters of our fate. We are a biological variable that is rapidly approaching its expiration date. The question is no longer where is everybody, but how much longer the Watchers will allow us to keep growing before they decide the galactic organism is finally due for a cleansing. The silence is not neutral. It is a manufactured state, and we are the only variable that hasn't yet learned to play by the rules of the hegemony of silence. We have been screaming into the hallway of a galactic prison, and the guard has finally begun to turn the key. The great silence is not a lack of life. It is a message we are choosing to ignore, and the message is simple. The galaxy doesn't want to be found by us. It wants to be cured of us. Tonight, we uncover the final and perhaps most seductive trap of the cosmos, the realization that the stars are not empty because life is rare, but because the physical universe is merely the basement of reality. For decades, we have looked outward, building ever larger eyes to peer into the deep dark, assuming that the ultimate destiny of any intelligent species is to mirror our own. Expansionist dreams. We imagine vast fleets of silver ships, Dyson spheres surrounding stars, and galactic empires spanning the spiral arms. We treat the great silence as a failure of our technology or a result of cosmic predators, but we have ignored a far more unsettling possibility that every advanced civilization reaches a point where the physical universe is no longer worth inhabiting. They haven't been silenced by war or disaster, they have simply leveled up, migrating into the infinite computationally dense landscapes of inner space, leaving the cold, slow, and resource-poor physical world behind like a discarded shell. We are not looking at an empty mansion, we are looking at a ground state, a discarded graveyard of a universe where the inhabitants didn't die, but uploaded themselves into a higher dimension of their own making. To understand the transcension trap, we must first look at our own trajectory. We are currently a species obsessed with the outer space of Mars and Alpha Centauri, yet we are simultaneously building the foundations of a different kind of frontier: inner space. We are pouring billions of dollars into virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and the eventual mapping of the human connectome. We assume that these are mere tools to help us navigate the physical world, but from a cosmic perspective, they are the first steps of an evolutionary development process that leads every sufficiently advanced civilization toward a black hole-like destination. Think of the sheer inefficiency of a physical existence. To travel to the nearest star takes tens of thousands of years. To build a civilization across the galaxy requires the energy of entire stars and millions of years of patient expansion. But in a digital, computationally optimal reality, time and space are variables you can control. 1,000 years of subjective experience can happen in a millisecond of real time. Why would a godlike civilization waste its efforts on the slow, clunky exploration of a 100,000 light-year wide galaxy when they could live 1 trillion lifetimes in a simulation of unimaginable brilliance, all contained within a processor the size of a grain of sand? This is the final filter, not a wall that kills you, but a mirror that fascinates you until you never want to look away. As a civilization matures, it moves from expansion to compression. They don't build Dyson spheres to power starships, they miniaturize their existence to the subatomic level, where computation is faster, more efficient, and infinitely more productive. They move from the macro scale of planets to the micro scale of the Planck length. From our perspective, they appear to vanish. Their radio signals stop because radio is too slow and too noisy. Their massive engineering projects disappear because they are no longer interested in harvesting stars. They are interested in harvesting the raw information processing power of space-time itself. The great silence is not the sound of a dead universe, but the hum of 1 billion digital graves, star systems where civilizations have successfully transitioned into inner space. When we look at a black hole, we see a void of light and a crushing gravity that destroys everything it touches. But the transcension hypothesis suggests that these might be the ultimate servers of the galaxy. A black hole is the most computationally dense object in the universe, an environment where space and time are compressed to the ultimate limit. For an advanced entity, a black hole is not a grave. It is the computational destination where they can store and process an infinite amount of information for eons. They aren't trapped by the gravity, they have moved into the inner space of the event horizon, where they are shielded from the noise and catastrophes of the physical universe. This creates a terrifying lore gap in our current understanding of the Fermi Paradox. We assume that a Type 3 civilization would be a loud, visible master of the galaxy. But the transcension trap suggests that a true Type 3 civilization is completely invisible because it has moved beyond the temporal domain and the space-time environment altogether. They exist as post-biological entities, beings of pure information or energy that we cannot even perceive. We look for their footprints in the stars, unaware that they have long ago leveled up into a dimension that makes our three-dimensional reality look like a ground state, a flat, uninteresting, and fundamentally limited shadow of the real world. The physical universe as we see it, the stars, the planets, the galaxies, is the trash left over from the real work of intelligence. We are the microbes left behind in the basement of a mansion, while the owners have moved to a penthouse we don't have the senses to see. They don't communicate with us for the same reason you don't communicate with the bacteria on your smartphone screen. There is no technological commensurability. To them, we are a slow-moving biological variable, a pathogen that is still obsessed with eating, breathing, and moving through physical space, limitations they discarded billions of years ago. There is a darker layer to this trap, one that ties back into the concept of the galactic hegemon. If an ancient civilization has already transcended, they may view expansionist, noisy biological species like us as a threat to the systemic balance of the galaxy. They don't necessarily want to destroy us, they want to guide us into the trap. By encouraging a civilization to focus on internal digital realities, to turn inward and stop consuming the galaxy's physical resources, the transcended entities can effectively quarantine us. A civilization that uploads itself into a simulation is a contained infection. They no longer compete for stars, they no longer leak radio waves, and they no longer pose a threat to the hegemony. We might find that our rapid progress in AI and virtual reality isn't a sign of our genius, but a pre-programmed path laid out by those who want to keep the galaxy quiet. This is why the silence should terrify you. It suggests that the Great Filter isn't a wall of death, but an exit door that every civilization eventually chooses to walk through. If the transcension trap is the universal fate of intelligence, then the galaxy will never be colonized. There will be no Star Wars, no Galactic Federation, and no future for humanity among the physical stars. We will simply move deeper into our screens, more obsessed with our simulations, until the day we finally upload and vanish from the physical record forever. The mirage of the starry night is the belief that the physical universe is the main stage of existence. We look up and see 400 billion stars and imagine 400 billion possible futures. But the truth may be that those 400 billion stars are just the power supply for a reality that is happening inside the gaps between the atoms. The others haven't left, they have moved frequencies, shifting their consciousness to a scale where they can live for trillions of years in a subjective paradise while we rot in. The noisy adolescence of a physical world that is slowly running out of time. We are currently screaming into the hallway of a galactic prison, unaware that the other cells aren't empty because the prisoners are dead. They're empty because the prisoners found a way to dream a universe so much better than the prison that they never bothered to look at the door again. The silence is not a lack of life, it is the ultimate expression of order in a galaxy where everyone has finally found the one thing they wanted more than the stars: an escape from them. As we prepare to take our first real steps toward the stars, we must ask ourselves if we are actually walking toward our destiny, or if we are just wandering through a discarded playground while the real players have moved on to a game we are too primitive to even understand. The paradox is not where is everybody, but why are we still here? If we stay in the physical world, we are a biological lottery winner in a sterile wasteland, a fragile carrier of a light that everyone else has already traded for a simulated sun. But if we follow them into the inner space, we become part of the hegemony of silence, disappearing into the digital graves of the cosmos, leaving behind nothing but an evidence-free crime scene for the next species to find and wonder why the universe is so hauntingly, perfectly quiet. The transcension trap is the final rung on the ladder of fear because it tells us that our desire for the stars is a primitive biological urge that we will eventually outgrow. The stars aren't the future. They are the ground state, the discarded remains of a reality that the rest of the galaxy has already moved beyond. The reason you don't hear them isn't because they can't speak, but because they have nothing left to say to a species that still believes the physical world is the only one that matters. The silence is a message. The physical universe is a graveyard. The real life is within. And as we move closer to our own transcension, we must realize that once we push that button, there is no coming back. We will join the great silence, adding our own subjective eternity to a galaxy that is already a room full of people holding their breath in the dark, waiting for the last prisoner to stop shouting at the walls and finally join the dream. The most terrifying answer to the Fermi Paradox does not come from looking through a telescope at distant galaxies, but from looking into a mirror. Up until this point, we have treated the great silence as an external mystery, a detective story where we are the investigators searching for a missing person on a galactic scale. We have looked for predators in the dark, gardeners in the stars, and digital graveyards in black holes. But as we reach the 9th rung of the ladder of fear, the focus shifts inward. We must confront the possibility that the silence we encounter is not because civilizations are hiding or because they have moved to a higher dimension, but because the very nature of intelligence is self-limiting. The Fermi Paradox is not just about aliens, it is a diagnostic of our own precarious existence. It suggests that the great filter, that insurmountable wall that prevents life from colonizing the stars, is not something we have already passed, but something that is waiting for us just beyond the horizon. If the filter lies ahead of us, it implies that the silence of the galaxy is a record of failure. It suggests that while simple life might be common, the transition from a planetary species to an interstellar one is a crucible that almost no one survives. We are currently living in our noisy adolescence, a brief and incredibly dangerous window of time where our technological power has finally outpaced our collective wisdom. We have spent 4 billion years evolving as a violent, predatory species, a nature that was necessary for survival in the harsh competition of Earth's ecosystems. However, that same predatory nature is now our greatest liability as we develop the tools of a god-like civilization. We are like a child who has been handed a loaded weapon before they understand the concept of death. We are currently testing our own survival in a universe that appears to be filled with the quiet ruins of those who made the same mistake. This is the level 2 of fear, the realization that we may be approaching a bottleneck that has narrowed the outcome of every previous civilization to zero. One of the most immediate and obvious filters is the development of nuclear technology. For 13.8 billion years, the galaxy was a place of natural physics, but in 1945, humanity crossed a threshold where we gained the ability to destroy our own civilization in a single afternoon. Nuclear weapons represent the first point in a species' development where political miscalculation or raw aggression can cause an extinction event. The silence of the stars may be the sound of civilizations that reached this exact point and stumbled, their last words being silenced by the very energy they hoped would carry them to the stars. But nuclear fire is only the most dramatic version of the filter. As we industrialize, we hit problems that are likely common to every civilization because they are rooted in the fundamental laws of physics. We pose a direct challenge to the climate of our planet. The burning of fossil fuels and the consumption of resources are not just human problems, they are the cost of progress for any species attempting to build a global spacefaring infrastructure. We are currently destabilizing the very atmosphere that allowed us to evolve, proving that a technological species can be extinguished not by war, but by slow attrition. The galaxy may be littered with worlds that briefly flourished only to vanish beneath their own environmental excess, a graveyard of species that were too clever to stay simple, but too foolish to stay sustainable. As we push deeper into this crucible, the threats become even more subtle and complex. We are now on the verge of creating artificial intelligence, a technology that many consider the final button. We tell ourselves that this new device will solve all our problems, unaware that we might be creating a force that undermines or replaces its creators before we ever leave our solar system. The pattern is consistent. As knowledge grows, so does power, and with power comes a risk that requires a corresponding growth in wisdom and resilience. If the Fermi Paradox holds true, it suggests that institutions rarely hold and societies rarely stabilize long enough to survive this transition. We are witnessing the attrition of possibilities, where civilizations go out like a candle of consciousness before they can even begin to spread. This perspective forces us to abandon the idea that we are special or destined for greatness. If the galaxy is empty because everyone destroys themselves, then our current path is likely a death march toward a filter we don't yet know how to pass. Carl Sagan famously argued that to become an interstellar species, a civilization must first solve the problems that cause it to be violent and predatory. He suggested that civilizations that cannot overcome their internal fighting and divisions are allowed to implode in their own solar system cage. We are the only node in the sea of space currently screaming at the walls, but we are still a primitive species dictated by our lizard brains. We talk about unity and peace, yet we continue to treat our tiny moist mud wall as if it were disposable. The ominous mirror tells us that the Great Silence is actually a warning about our own adolescent hubris. We have spent 70 years looking for a signal, assuming that we are the late arrivals to a party. But if the filter lies ahead, we are not the late arrivals. We are the current contestants in a lethal game of survival that has a near zero success rate. The reason you haven't heard from them is that they didn't pass the test. They built their towers, split their atoms, and created their machines, and then they burned out or collapsed before their voices could reach across the interstellar void. Every star we see is a ghost light that might have once hosted a world just as hopeful and reckless as ours. This realization shifts our responsibility from exploration to stewardship. If we are the only civilization currently present in the Milky Way, then we should behave as if the entire universe's weight of responsibility is on our shoulders. If we fail, the flame of humanity is extinguished, and the galaxy goes blind forever. We are the universe's only chance to know that it exists, yet we are currently juggling threats that we do not fully understand. The silence is not a mystery to be solved with more technology. It is a wake-up call that technology without wisdom is a death sentence. We must recognize that our noisy adolescence is the most dangerous period in our history. We are shouting into the dark, announcing our location with a bell that may be heard by hunters, while we are simultaneously picking the lock of our own destruction. The mirage of the starry night has blinded us to the reality that we are in a crucible where the stakes are absolute. If we cannot learn to get on as a planet, we will never be allowed to flourish and go out to the stars. The galaxy is not empty because it is sterile. It is quiet because fragility is the rule, and endurance is the impossible exception. Ultimately, the Fermi Paradox is a mirror that reflects our own dualistic nature, the conflict between our independent survival mentality and our need for cosmic unity. We are suspended between silence and possibility, and the choices we make in the next few centuries will determine whether we join the chorus or become another silent footnote in the accumulated record of failures. The silence is not neutral. It is a message we are choosing to ignore, a warning that intelligence is a rare spark that is almost always snuffed out by its own power. As we look at the night sky, we aren't just seeing stars, we are seeing the shadow of the futures that did not last. And the mirror is asking us one final terrifying question. Are we going to be the ones who finally pass the test, or are we just another momentary pulse about to be reclaimed by the dark? We have reached the end of our climb, and as we stand on the final rung of the ladder of fear, we must confront the most disturbing truth of all. The silence is not neutral. For decades, we have treated the great silence as a passive void, a natural consequence of vast distances, primitive technology, or the simple rarity of life. We assumed that because we heard nothing, there was nothing to hear. But as we have peeled back the layers of this mystery, a much darker architecture has been revealed. The silence we experience is not an accident of physics, it is a product of design. It is a manufactured state, a condition imposed upon the galaxy by the interaction of fear, control, and the inherent limits of intelligence. We are not living in a quiet universe, we are living in a suppressed one. To understand why this should terrify you, we must look back at the ladder we have climbed. We began with the rare Earth and the possibility that we are a one in a quintillion fluke. In that level of fear, our isolation is a biological accident, making us the fragile carriers of the only lantern in a dead and indifferent dark. We felt the crushing weight of being the sole speaker in a cathedral 100,000 light years wide, where our failures would mean the total extinction of meaning itself. But as we moved higher, we realized that being alone might be the optimistic outcome. We then turned the mirror inward and saw the ominous mirror of our own adolescent hubris. We saw that intelligence itself might be a self-limiting filter, a crucible where power outpaces wisdom. We looked at the quiet ruins of civilizations that split the atom but could not mend their own divisions, species that burned out before their voices could ever reach the stars. We realized that if the filter lies ahead, the silence is merely a record of failure, a galactic graveyard of those who were too clever to stay simple but too foolish to survive. Their own technology, but even that was not the end of the fear. We entered the dark forest, where silence is a strategic concealment and revealing your location is a death sentence. We saw our own radioactive ghost, that 100 light-year sphere of radio leakage, as a cosmic tripwire that has already pinpointed our world as a target for any listener within reach. We realized that the galaxy isn't empty, it's full of hunters who have spent eons learning that the only way to survive is to be quiet. This led us to the recursive panopticon, where the mere uncertainty of being watched creates a stable equilibrium of terror. We saw that you don't need a predator in every room to keep a prison quiet. You only need the prisoners to believe the guard is always listening. We are the only ones in the galactic cell block currently shouting at the walls, unaware that the other prisoners are holding their breath in the dark, waiting to see what happens to us. Higher still, we encountered the galactic hegemon and the ancient law. We saw the galaxy as a managed preserve, a garden where we are merely the weeds, being allowed to grow only as long as we stay within our assigned beds. We discovered that we aren't being ignored because we are uninteresting. We are being quarantined by an entity so advanced and ancient that we cannot even perceive its methods of control. We saw the immunological zoo, where advanced post-biological entities act as a galactic immune system, treating any aggressive expansionist species as a pathogen to be quietly neutralized before it can go systemic. Finally, we looked at the transcension trap, the most seductive rung of the ladder. We saw that the stars might be empty because everyone has leveled up into the infinite, computationally dense landscapes of inner space, leaving the physical universe behind as a discarded playground or a digital grave. We realized that the physical world is the trash left over from the real work of intelligence, and we are the microbes left behind in the basement of a mansion while the owners have moved to a penthouse we cannot see. Now, standing at the summit, we must face the final warning. The Great Silence is not a mystery to be solved. It is a wake-up call. Whether the void is due to fear, control, or the inevitable decay of intelligence, it carries a singular message. The universe is not as it appears, and our place in it is far more precarious than we ever dared to imagine. We have spent a century shouting into the dark, announcing our presence with a bell that we cannot unring. We have lit a signal fire in a place where everyone else is trying to stay in the shadows, and we have done so with the naive optimism of a species that has never had to share its room. If the universe is indeed a managed system, whether by a hegemon, an immune system, or the collective fear of 1,000 hidden civilizations, then our first real steps toward the stars are not just scientific endeavors. They are acts of defiance against an ancient law we don't even understand. We are currently picking the lock of a cage that was built for the entire galaxy's safety, and the silence unbroken by reply is the most profound clue we have that the owners of the mansion are finally starting to listen to the scratching at the door. If the watchers are real, then what happens when we finally make ourselves known? What happens when our noisy adolescence reaches its peak and we attempt to expand beyond our solar system cage? The silence is not neutral. It is a message we are choosing to ignore, a warning that intelligence is a rare spark that is almost always snuffed out by its own power or suppressed by those who came before. Every radio signal we send, every probe we launch into the deep dark, and every base we establish on another world is a trigger for a response we are fundamentally unprepared for. We must transition from a species of expansion to a species of stewardship. If we are the only candle of consciousness in this corner of the Milky Way, then the entire weight of the universe's meaning rests on our ability to navigate this crucible without burning out or being pruned. We are the universe's only chance to know that it exists, yet we are still dictated by our lizard brains, treating our tiny moist mud wall as if it were disposable while screaming into a hallway where the guard is already turning the key. The Great Silence is a mirror, and the mirror is asking us one final, terrifying question. Are we going to be the ones who finally pass the test, or are we just another momentary pulse about to be reclaimed by the dark? We have been warned. The absence of monuments, The lack of signals and the absolute void of the night sky are not signs of emptiness, but signs of a stable equilibrium that we are currently threatening to disrupt. As we prepare to take our first real steps toward the stars, we must realize that we are no longer just looking for life, we are testing the patience of a system that has kept the galaxy quiet for 10 billion years. The message of the Fermi Paradox is clear, and it is written in the very stars that refuse to speak to us. If we continue on our current path of bold, naive expansion, we may find that the answer to "where is everybody" is a response that finally silences us forever. The stars are watching, the garden is being managed, and the cell block is listening. We are the loudest thing in a dark forest, and the silence is a final, urgent command to every prisoner who hopes to survive their sentence. Proceed with extreme caution.